All right, everybody, welcome to TNM Unplugged, the space where you can elevate your mind, your heart, and your soul into the new levels of yourself. The spaces when you can get inspired, the space when you can learn about yourself, about the world, through coaching, through leadership development, through acceleration of your human consciousness. Today, we have back with us David Papa. He's one of our popular guests. And in our first recording in the podcast, we talked a lot about the heart and heart consciousness and making decisions from the heart. And we want to continue talking to David about a different topic today, which is how do you think for yourself in these times of crisis? Right now, we are challenged with a lot of things that are happening in our world, mainly with the COVID-19 situation across the world, with the new lockdowns and new measures being imposed. And David and I both thought it would be really valuable for us to talk a little bit about it and then to empower you to begin thinking about for yourself in these times of crisis and make decisions and choices that resonate with your inner beingness. Okay, so let's dive into it and see what happens in this communication and conversation. Welcome, David.
Thanks so much, Zoran. Really happy to be here. I love that you have this platform. Everything you described about what this is just so resonates with me. I love the idea of helping ourselves elevate to some different way of navigating the world. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, and you and I, in prep of this podcast, talked a little bit about the current situation right now, and we wanted to kind of dive into it a little bit more to set up the platform for conversation to how do we empower ourselves and people around us to really think and resonate for themselves and not to be overwhelmed with the external stimulations around different measures that have been imposed right now, once again, globally. So where would you like to start with that, David? How do you feel this morning?
Yeah, well, to be honest, I was feeling quite angry this morning because Czech Republic is in another wave of really tight restrictions. We have a 9 p.m. curfew, can't be outside after 9 p.m. All the stores are closed. We're only allowed to go visit, family or, go food shopping. And, it's very, very strict. And a lot of people are unable to work. And, there's all these fears that are coming up again. And I think, you mentioned that France now just went into another severe lockdown as of today's recording. So, this is happening again in these countries, and of course in the U.S. The official statistics continue to paint a picture of the disease spreading and growing. So the what I'm seeing with the people I talk to, the people around me, and even in myself, is how quickly we get into fear in these situations. Almost everybody I'm talking to, no matter if they think the restrictions are necessary because there's a very dangerous disease, or if they think the restrictions are not necessary at all, and this is the government being completely like almost totalitarian. This is both quote unquote sides, of the issue are just scared. People are in fear. And, as a coach, someone who studies psychology and decision making, what we know about fear is that it hijacks our brain and our brain's thinking. I mean, one thing you could say is that when we're in a real fear-based mode, we are not thinking for ourselves. We're not thinking from our real self. We're thinking the thoughts we get are from our least evolved, the reptilian brain, that brainstem survival brain. That's what's actually doing our thinking. And is that the place we want to navigate the crisis from? Is that actually gonna help us get to outcomes we want, or help the people around us? So that's what I wanted to talk about today.
Yeah, so let's look into that, because for me it's the same thing. When we are paralyzed by fear, or we receive the communication that are fear-based from the mass media, from the communication from the government, and people get into that space, oh my God, this is happening again. We're back into survival mode. and we're fulfilled with that tension inside of our body. And as you said beautifully, that hijacks our thinking, and then we make irrational decisions and choices. Let's dive into that a little bit. How can we really connect to ourselves and mainly to our brain for us to be able to manage that in a more effective way, so that even though the reality around us it's fearful, or we have, as you said, real issues or real fears, or this is something that is speculated or created, but despite of that, this is happening. So, my question to us is, what do we do with our brain, and how do we connect to our brain, and how do we understand our reactions in order for us to be able to transform into a more peaceful approach to what's happening around us?
Yeah. Well, I guess the first thing to practice is to try to get some space from your own thoughts. Most people believe all their thoughts, but your thoughts are like, your brain is a biological organ. Your thoughts are like a reflex. They your brain is translating some type of impulse inside yourself into a thought that you can that maybe forms in language, right, or an image, but it's gets coming from somewhere inside of you. Your brain isn't just picking that out of nothing. It's coming from, the energy you have in your nervous system is being translated into language and images in the brain. So when you have these thoughts coming up about what's going on, and oh my gosh, this is terrible, and oh my gosh, I'm so threatened,
Mhm.
the first thing to do is to realize, okay, that's my brain's reflex, survival reflex, trying to keep me safe. I don't necessarily need to believe all the details that my brain is telling me right now. My brain is terrified. So the first step is whatever you can do to cultivate just that space to, instead of immediately follow your thoughts and believe them all, to just look at them and see where the thoughts are coming from. So there are several ways to do this that work for people. I mean, this is one of the reasons that meditation is helpful, because it gives you practice in watching your thoughts. So then when you are in an intense situation, you're more likely to be able to have that capacity, But say you're not doing that much. One thing that really helps is to just, as soon as you have these fear-based thoughts going in your mind, just start a deep breathing immediately. Just start
Mm.
a deep breathing as much as you can, because this sounds very simple, but literally what's happening when you start the deep breathing is you're telling your nervous system, we're safe right now in this moment. We don't need to panic in this moment. And that will give you space between your brain stem's thoughts that it's screaming at you and what you actually might want to act on. So the deep breathing is super helpful. Also, getting up and moving in like an abnormal way tricks the nervous system into thinking, hey, we might not be in danger right now. For example, you can get up and just do like a silly dance, or wave your arms, or like spin around a few times. And these things sound very silly, but they're no less silly than sometimes the very crazy thoughts coming from our survival reflex. All we're doing is tell you, if you were actually in a dangerous situation, like if you were being attacked by, an animal, a tiger or something, you wouldn't do a silly dance, right? So when you do some weird movement, you're telling your nervous system, I can relax in this moment. And when you get your nervous system to calm down, now you can start getting thoughts from a different part of your brain, from the more involved part of your brain. So we want to do these physiological things that give us space between our super fear-based thoughts. Everybody's had the experience of like, oh my God, I can't believe this is happening. Then this is going to happen. Then that's going to happen. Like, oh, and like the panic builds, the anxiety builds. That's just a biological survival circuit.
Mhm.
We don't have to see that as like the huge, we don't have to believe all the stuff that's happening in that biological survival circuit. Instead, we need to change that circuit, unclip that circuit, so that our nervous system starts to relax and we can actually examine the situation without panic. That's the place I would start. Is that making sense?
Oh, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense to me. And I think that this spaces in between, when we can practice mindfulness and meditation to really observe our reactions, or to distract ourselves by funny, silly, wonderful movement, it's really communicating to our brain, you can relax, you can trust, you don't need to be on this flight or fight mode. Because I think all of us right now, on a certain level, are hijacked with this high pressure from the external world that we really need to be afraid. And no matter what we say, our subconscious mind is picking it up, through conversations, through, watching the media, through reading about it, through interactions to people around ourselves. You can pick it up. And I think that the more we feel ourselves with that fear, the more challenging it is for our cognitive brain that can really understand that this is something that we don't need to be afraid of on the level of survival to process it. It's so difficult. So I really with you that, distracting ourselves, becoming mindful, moving, really creating that space when you can observe your thoughts and understand where is that fear coming from can help a lot, right?
Yeah. 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 Well, specifically what helps me to really try to understand is, where did the thought come from?
Mm-hmm.
Because, all of our thoughts, they come from somewhere. They're not just random.
Yeah.
They're so something inside of us is doing a calculation, and then this thought is popping in our brain. So we, without that space, you said something really great before we started. Without that space of being able to see our thoughts happening and look at where they're coming from, we are not able to hear our own inner voice. We're just drowning in the thoughts that are being stimulated from the external world.
Mm-hmm.
The external world is stimulating the survival reflex. Then those survival reflexes giving us all these fearful thoughts. And then we're not able to hear the inner voice of our heart, the inner voice of our deeper wisdom. So these relaxation, physiological, relaxation techniques to stop the survival circuit.
Mm-hmm.
They have a very, deep outcome, in that we can end up hearing our inner voice, the voice of our intuition, our wisdom, maybe our inner guidance, something that's telling us like, okay, here's actually what really resonates for me to act in this situation. I'm hearing all this stuff in the news. I'm hearing this stuff from other people. I have these restrictions. What feels inside of me like my version of the right thing to do?
Yeah.
And it's really hard to hear that if we're not seeing where our thoughts come from.
Yeah. For me, what helps, David, is that I don't identify with my thoughts. A lot of the people in the space of relating to themselves identify. They are what they think. You are what you think. And even in some of the traditional schools, they will tell you, you are what you think. And I feel that this is something that we need to challenge, that the thoughts come from certain space, but you are not what you think. So for me, that observation and me knowing that I am not what I'm thinking, this is just a thought. It can be a collective thought. It can be my thought. It can be a thought that I picked up from somewhere. It can be a belief system that has been communicated to me and that my mind is accepting as its own belief system. But having that distance and having that understanding that you are not what you are thinking, it's really empowering and refreshing to me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's super helpful, and
Mm.
you're right. People get imagine that it's them, the real them thinking those thoughts. But
Mm.
as you say, it's
Mm.
not. So many of our thoughts are just things we picked up from other people when we were kids. They're thoughts based on society's construct of what's right and wrong, So, it's not really our thoughts. And that's not our brain's fault, It's just that's how the biological part of our brain works. It purposefully picks up what other people say because it thinks it needs to do that to survive the world we're in. So we really have to examine what our brain is doing, because the most of the thoughts that it has are not our true real thoughts. They're thoughts, as you say, that we got from somewhere else.
Mm.
It's the external influencing our mental world. And so, one of the things that really helps me, I really like that identification thing you said. One of the things that helps me is using the body to help. So, for example, if I have a thought that is disturbing me, or if I have a thought that just keeps looping in my head, sometimes what I'll do is I'll imagine kind of grabbing that thought and pulling it down into my body and feeling what does that thought feel like in my body? And if that thought, if I feel what the sort of the emotional source of that thought, or the emotional connection to that thought in my body, and my body is just tensing and feeling fear and feeling like, and I'm that there's that fright there,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe my body will freeze and I'll start to go numb a little bit. I'll know that these thoughts, that particular thought is coming from my survival reflex,
That's
is
it.
not coming from my true self. So there's also like an embodied way to kind of test your thoughts. Yeah.
Yeah, and to really feel them. I love that connection between thinking and feeling in your body, because for me that's also helpful, and I'm sure it's going to be helpful with to our audience, to allow time and space to really see or feel how that thought feels inside of your body and what kind of tension or expansion it creates, and then you can choose what would you like to do with that thought, and this is also part of mastering your mind, because mastering your mind is super challenging, especially nowadays when we are in a crisis. It was challenging before a crisis, but nowadays it's super challenging
Yeah.
because we have so many thoughts. They're, negative or disturbing or fear-based, or putting us in a space of losing our sovereignty or our authenticity, because simply we have to comply, we have to be obedient, we have to be good, and this is what society demands. So on a certain level, we're losing ourselves and we're losing our ability to master our mind. So that's why I think this topic is also exciting if you kind of drill a little bit deeper. So what will take us to master our mind a little bit more in these times? What will really help us, you, me, and the humanity right now, in addition to what we share already? Anything else that comes up for you?
What I really like what you said is that once you get space from your thought and you don't identify your real self with that thought, you then have a choice for how you want to respond to that thought. And I think that is a choice that all of us have, no matter what the restrictions are, no matter what no matter what we think is going on in the situation. All of us have the chance to see what's happening in our mind and actually choose how we want to respond to that thing, to that internal thought, that internal feeling.
Yeah.
And so, there's nothing wrong with fear itself. Of course, we're afraid. Feeling threatened is part of survival. It's just trying to keep us safe. It's not the fear itself that's the problem. We're going to feel fear, but what's a problem is when we don't then make a choice. How am I going to respond to my own fear? When we don't make that choice, we're giving away so much of our freedom. We're giving away so much of our own internal sovereignty and agency, because when those thoughts come up, when this fear comes up, we get to decide, okay, how am I going to respond to this? Am I going to listen to it? Am I going to do everything it tells me? Am I going to go tell everybody else, what my brain is telling me right now and all the fears I have? And, or maybe that feels right to do, but you don't know that unless you stop and turn off the survival circuit and check in with your and decide, how am I going to respond to this fear that I have from a deeper place? That's where we all have a chance for some agency.
Yeah. Yeah. And transforming that survival circuit, that we're not reactive. So for me, the whole distinction that we use in coaching really well, reaction versus response, being able to take space, take breath in the stillness and choose your response instead of being reactive all the time. And what I'm seeing around myself is that no matter what we say about the situation, people are reactive. They don't take enough time to breathe. So one of the thing that I practice a lot in this mastering my mind and managing the internal fear that comes, from the external stimuli, it's to breathe. It's to really take time to
Yeah.
breathe and to allow myself to choose my response to this situation, and to allow myself to invite that inner voice of wisdom that sometimes whispers and sometimes it's loud, but most of the time it's very, very quiet. It
Yeah.
requires silence for us to hear it, to come up and to say, okay, Zoran, in this situation, here is your response. And here is how you can transform your fear. Here is how you can elevate your emotional state. And here is the most powerful way forward. Yeah?
Yeah. 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 Absolutely. I love that you said there's like, sometimes to hear that inner voice, we need the silence.
Mm.
And our fear thoughts are kind of the opposite of silence. They like scream at us, and they try to get us to take action very quickly, and fix the
Mm.
situation very quickly. Or if we feel stuck in the situation, we just shout and tell the people around us and like panic. If we feel stuck in the
Mm.
situation, so all these things you're saying are the opposite of that. All the things we're talking about are the opposite of that. Go slower, cultivate the silence. All of us. I mean, it doesn't take very long practicing meditation for people to realize that all of us have this place of stillness inside. And this place of stillness, is described by mystics and religions in many different ways. But everyone who goes and looks for this ends up finding it. There's something there, and this stillness is somehow untouched by the turmoil going on externally. And in this stillness, kind of this silence, I like to think of it at my center, somewhere in my very center. Kind of, it feels kind of like in the base of my heart somehow. Like there's this still place, and that is where my inner voice, speaks to me. And just like you said, I need to get silent to hear it. And so much of mind mastery is learning how to cultivate silence no matter what your mind is doing, learning how to let thoughts go instead of attach onto them and follow them, learning how to discern which are the thoughts that are coming from, the very, your triggers and the most fearful, worst case scenario parts of you versus thoughts that might appear from, a different place or higher wisdom, versus the very subtle communication that comes from this still part of us, and when you go exploring this still part of you, you realize like, oh my gosh, it's like vast. It's so vast. There's, you know, we are beings that are so much vaster than the person identity that we have, and cultivating this vastness, this awareness that we can all access, that is beyond who we are as a person. That's also, I find, very, very useful in a time like this, because that sense helps me see how I really want to personally navigate what's going on.
And for you, when you are listening to that inner voice, when you're able to transform your mind, meaning, as you beautifully said, not attached to your thoughts, or not attached, not to chase them, not to be in the loops of, thinking the same thought again and again and again, but you're able to bypass that. You're able to harmonize and create coherence inside of yourself, and you connect to that inner, deeper voice. What is this voice saying to you about the situation right now, for example, that we find ourselves in?
Oh man.
Hmm.
I'm just going to take a second to
Mhm.
feel a little bit. Well, my inner voice is saying right now that this crisis, whatever it whatever it really may be, whatever the truth of it is physically, it's giving us an opportunity to elevate ourselves. It's giving us an opportunity to kind of wake up on some level. It's giving us an opportunity to challenge what we thought about our society, to challenge what we thought about our structures and the way we organize our society, and challenge what we think we know about health and humanity, and this is just whatever is going on is giving us the chance to have a deeper examination of who we really are and what we're doing.
Mhm.
And the world is so uncertain, and the information is so contradictory. We almost have no choice but to go deeper in ourselves to find out who we really are, what we really believe, and what we're really going to stand for with our lives, what we're really going to communicate by the way we live. So, my inner voice is saying that this is actually a big opportunity to use the crisis as a some type of wake up. And the other thing it's telling me in this moment actually is keep the view of that big, broader perspective that we're not just physical human beings, we're spiritual beings. And there is a spiritual underpinning to everything that's to all of life. All physical matter comes from that energetic soup called the 0 point field. At its most fundamental level, we're all one. So there's something kind of, there's I'm I'm part of something bigger. That's what I feel like. This is all part of something bigger, And what is that bigger thing? It's somehow related to our evolution as a species. It's somehow related to our ability to move forward to create a new version of humanity. That's what I feel like.
Wonderful, wonderful transmission. I really hope that everybody who is listening to this felt that as I did. It's a great transmission. And that awakening of our consciousness, that awakening through the crisis is something that, it's in front of us. And I feel that in order for us to be able to be awakened in the most profound potential of this invitation, part of this is being able to bypass and master our mind. Because I feel that unless we are able to do this, what we discussed in the first part of this recording, then it's going to be extremely challenging for us to feel that inner voice and to step into that awakening and to seize the opportunity, right? So if we are in this reactive space, bombarded by the mass media, paralyzed by fear, in anxiety about our life, what will happen next, with our livelihood, with our finances, with our, whatever you're being challenged with at this moment in time. And we are consistently in this space of fight and flight, in reaction with our brain, then of course we're not able to listen to this inner voice and step into that purest potential that you were just expressing and feeling that bigger picture and connecting to the most positive outcome of this by saying, this is an awakening, and this is what this crisis is bringing to all of us. It's calling us to awaken. So I think that this step that we're talking about today is so important.
Yeah.
To be able to drop in there, because when you drop in there, then you can empower yourself by saying, hold on a second, it's all around and outside of me. It's on a certain level a narrative. And this narrative might be false narrative or true narrative, but it's just a story. It's just a narrative. And inside of me, I have this voice that is saying to me, wake up, elevate. This is an awakening. You need to transform your reality. You need to transform your society. You need to transform how the humanity is at this moment in time. You are playing a significant part in all this transformation, because each and every of us is important. Our feelings, our thoughts, our actions, they count. So to be empowered like you are from your inner voice on that level, we all collectively have to master our mind and be able to create the space to really kind of sit in that silence, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. Every single person here right now on the planet is contributing to what humanity is becoming. And, I happen to believe, I'm quite woo woo, as they say, and I happen to believe that there's the part of us that's not human, the, the larger, whatever it is, the spiritual part of us, maybe our real self, chose to be here at this time. If you're here right now, you chose to be here at this time when these crazy stuff was happening, because there was something you wanted to experience or something you wanted to contribute that would lead to the evolution of us all, and what we are talking about is kind of an evolution. We evolved these very complex, interesting brains that can do amazing, beautiful things. And these brains still have that survival wiring that will hijack our thinking. So the next step, in our evolution is kind of this mind mastery. The next step in our evolution is realizing like that biological mind doesn't have to run my life. I can actually live in this world from a different place. And one thing that helps me is to realize that, mind doesn't just mean one thing. Like mind doesn't just mean the biological mind. If we are spiritual beings, that also means we have like a higher mind. This is one way I think about it. So, the thoughts that are happening in our brain, they could be coming from our biological survival mind, but they could also be coming from our higher mind. And that inner voice that we hear, these are kind of sort of, you could think of them as thoughts coming from our higher mind. So we evolved to like a higher order complex organism on this planet, our physical organism, and it can do very complex, high order things compared to most of the life on Earth. But now, a crisis like this can push us into another evolutionary step where we realize that some of that biological wiring doesn't serve us on the highest level.
That's it.
If we want to stop having a fear-based society, we have to stop acting from our fear-based wiring. So there's another level to get to. And that mind mastery that we're talking about helps us evolve to another level of being able to operate in the world. Because we get to hear our higher mind instead of just our biological one.
Yeah. Yeah. And that higher mind is also linked to our higher self. And we talked about higher self in one of the first episodes we were recording together. And that higher mind has that overall, an overarching wisdom and perspective that we can't see from the lower mind. We cannot see from the scared city mentality or being fearful and tensed all the time because simply we're not able to open up. Right. So let's lay out a few of the practices. Let's see what wants to happen next. We can do a meditation, or we can talk a little bit more about how can we empower people and what can we offer for people to be able to transform that conditioning of the lower mind, which is the fear-based mind and survival mechanism, into connecting themselves to their higher mind and inner voice. Anything that pops up with you that you would love to do with the audience right now?
Well, we can definitely do some type of meditation. There's a very simple meditation we can do that turns on the parasympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system is the one that excites us. It's the one that gets activated when we are in like a panic or fear mode. Our brain thinks we need to take action right away. But then there's the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the calming one. And the way to activate that is through you can do certain breathing techniques, and certain focusing on your heart actually changes the way your vagus nerve and your heart communicates with your brain. And when you change the signal in your vagus nerve, which is the largest nerve in your body outside of your spinal column, you will actually activate your parasympathetic nervous system, and your whole system will relax, and you can break the chain of that survival reflex. So we can do a simple meditation on this call later.
Let's do it.
So I would say, okay, we'll do that. And I'll just recap some of those practices. Do deep breathing so you get space from your thoughts. Realize you can look at your thoughts without following them and completely believing everything they say. Realize you have a choice to respond to whatever thought comes up. There's another layer, there's another step you can take when you get a thought, is that you can then respond to that thought. And doing the physiological movements, the silly movements to break the chain of the survival reflex. And then do what you can to go cultivate that stillness inside yourself. Find your real inner voice that's coming from your true self, or maybe your higher mind instead of your biological mind, because that is connected to that's connected to who you really are. That's connected to you as a spiritual being that's having a human experience. So that's the summary and the recap. And now let's do a simple practice that we can.
Yeah, let's. I'm holding the space you're leading.
Okay. All right. Great. So everybody who's listening, just First, get a little bit comfortable wherever you are. This is going to be an eyes closed thing. So, if you're driving while you're listening to this, maybe don't try it this time. But get your feet flat on the floor. See if you can make your spine straight. And I invite you to close your eyes. Just let your hands, for now, rest gently on your lap. And start to breathe more slowly than you normally would. This isn't going to take very long. I'm going to show you one quick way to access your relaxation circuits. Just slowing your breathing. Deep in breath and out breath, and just feeling what's happening in the body. There's nothing for you to really do. Your body will giving you sensations automatically. Your body knows how to breathe. You're just extending that breath a little bit. And what we're extending the breath, we're going to extend so that it's a 5 count on the in breath and a 5 count on the out breath. So we'll do it together. So let all the air out. Let whatever air you have right now, let it all out of your body. Just pause for a second. And now we're going to breathe in a count of 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're full up with air and we're going to let it out now in a count of 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Just take a little pause. In for 5. 1, 2, 3. Really fill up. 5. Now out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. In. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Holding it just for a second. Out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Keep that rhythm going, that pace where you're breathing in for 5 and out for 5. And it's actually helpful to count in your mind because it gives your mind something to do and something to focus on. So keep counting in your mind as you breathe in for 5 and out for 5. And as you're counting and as you're breathing, what I'd like for you to do now is put one hand on your heart. And as you count and as you breathe, I would like you to put your awareness in your heart area. What is happening right below your hand as you count in for 5 and out for 5? So we'll do it together. So wherever you are in your breath cycle, just let all the air out of your body. Let it all out. Feel what's happening in your heart space right below your hand. And now in. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. As you breathe in, 1, 2. Just feel what happens in your heart space as it fills up with air. Now out. 1, 2. And as the breath is going out, just feel what happens as the breath moves out through that heart space. 5. Breathing in. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Keep that focus on your heart. Breathing out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now I'm going to let you do a couple rounds of that just on your own in silence. Count in your mind on the in breaths, 1 to 5. Count in your mind on the out breaths, 1 to 5. And while you're counting, notice you can also hold your awareness in your heart and seeing what's happening in your chest area. So let's just do a couple rounds now. Now out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
That meditation was absolutely amazing. And thank you so much for sharing that. I'm sure this is going to be very empowering for a lot of people listening to manage themselves in these times.
Yeah, well, thanks so much, Zoran. It was great to have this discussion. If anybody out there is continuing practicing this, which I highly recommend, if you get distracted by your mind during the counting, just refocus your attention on your heart. And if you just do that for just a few minutes, you change your entire body chemistry. You change the entire way your nervous system works. If you want to read more about the science behind it, it's summarized in Greg Braden's book, Resilience from the Heart. So that's a good resource for you. But and also if you do that for a few minutes, you actually have benefits for hours. Your body chemistry is different for hours afterward, according to the research that they've done. So this is a very real way to help you physiologically still yourself so you can hear your higher voice. So thanks for trying it, everybody. Onward for the evolution of humankind.
Yeah, and thank you so much for being here with us today. Powerful conversation. We went places into the depth of the mind and the soul and the inner voice. We'll continue soon. Lovely to have you on the program, and thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Zoran. Pleasure to be here.
Enjoy. Bye.
Bye.